I'd love for you to give a warm welcome to Federica Teodori from Riot Games, talking about chasing actionability.
Hi, everyone. God, this is very loud. Thanks for being here today, first of all. My name is Federica, and I'm here on the behalf of the tech governance team at Riot to give you a little bit of a snippet into our journey about chasing actionability. This presentation will cover the progress and especially the changes and challenges we went through in the last few years. Speaking of which, here's the plan for the next 30 minutes. In the first section, we will talk about the team, where we are, what we do, and what our goal is. We will then do a little bit of a jump in time, and we'll start exploring all of the different attempts, successes, and failures we encountered along the way. Sorry. After that, we will explore where we're at now and what the road ahead looks like. Hopefully, this matches your expectations. If not, you're still feel free to leave. The door is still partially open. I promise no hard feelings. Anyways, time to get started. So, although the team is relatively small, it's 5 people, including myself, we are quite spread across the planet. Presence in the right time zone allows us to serve our customers with monthly or quarterly business reviews. I will be referring to those as MBRs going forward, but more about that later. And we do this in a way in which we manage not to have any meetings in the middle of the night for everyone. While this is not part of this presentation, if you want to know more about how we make this time zone thing work for us, please do reach out after this talk. We can talk more about that. In terms of skill sets, the ones that you see on the slide aren't necessarily what we started as. This is the current formation and is a result of changing and adapting to the business needs along the years. We often tend to say that we are the FinOps team at Riot, but the scope of that governance is much more than that. We operate under what we call the 3 pillars of governance that are technology, security, and financial. Finance is what everyone understands when we're talking about FinOps. Technology is all about making sure that we're using cloud in the right way. So all of those choices that don't necessarily have an immediate financial gain, but still are going to be important down the way. Security is all about amplifying the voice of our InfoSec teams. We basically listen to the priority and direction they're setting for us, and we make sure to amplify their message. Part of our monthly business reviews is all about that and making sure that InfoSec topics do get enough leadership attention. But during this presentation, I will mostly be focusing on the financial and technology side, just because otherwise we will go a little bit off topic. But all in all, the same kind of challenges and changes that we need for those other 2 pillars are pretty much the same as what keeps happening also with security. So if I were to summarize what tech governance at Riot is a group that is there to ensure that cloud and cloud services at Riot are used well. In terms of a footprint, we are mostly on AWS. Regions, local zones, outposts, the whole shebang. Basically, if it exists, we have it at this point. But we also do have a little bit of a presence in Tencent regions. In terms of other things that we care about, SaaS products with variable spend are another of the big parts of what we care about. Think about repositories, CDNs, monitoring solutions, all of that. Hopefully, this is enough to give you a decent idea about which kind of space we're playing in and which kind of constraints we are faced with. So, time to go back to the beginning. How did it all start? As many before us, we mostly wanted to understand where cost is and how to make it visible. For allocation purposes, we decided to initially go for an account-based approach. At Riot, each customer that could ask would be a game team, but also a business unit, tends to have 1 or multiple accounts associated to them. Little spoiler for the future, this was not enough. We soon had the need of start adding tags to the mix, mostly because some shared accounts were part of what we had to deal with. In terms of savings, plans, and optimization, we initially looked at savings plans. They were the easier option. We could do that centrally. We managed for the entirety of the company. And the approach was pretty much to centralize it and cover as much as you can. This also means that we were able to, at least for the first few years, have very, very high coverage targets. So we managed to keep it around 90 to 100% consistently. We knew, however, that the role of our team wasn't necessarily just to cover spend, but was to advise. So we started looking at how do we start giving recommendations to actually reduce that spend. And as many in this room today, the first thing that we looked at was the native AWS recommendations that you could get from tools like Trusted Advisor or Compute Optimize. Those tools were already available to our engineers, but we did realize that no one was really looking consistently at them. So we decided to add a little bit of value by summarizing all of the recommendations that each customer will get for all of their accounts and basically provide it to them as a single report. And the additional thing that we did on top of that was to start presenting the data in an annualized format, mostly because a lot of the opportunities that they were seeing were on paper very small, but once you start accruing them all together, it gives you a very different perspective of what makes sense to do and what is the value of doing one thing over the other. Last but not least, we decided to do this in our monthly business reviews. So that means we did not send just reports. We actually got the right people in the room, and we had this discussion on a monthly, on a quarterly basis, depending on the size and the variability those groups were having. And thanks to those meetings, customers got to know us and our skill set, but we also got to know them and what they did care or did not care about. This is a very valuable insight for us to have, because we cannot just leverage that understanding during those meetings, but also to create action with them after the meeting and throughout the rest of the year. Riot tends to be a company with, I would say, good enough, decent internal mobility, and that means the person that is sitting representing one team one day is going to be probably in 6 to 12 months representing a different team. So actually understanding what that person cares about, what are their go-to quirks, so to say, it's something that we could leverage to tailor all those kind of information and insights to them in a slightly better way than just, that's the standard report, have fun with it. So how was that received? Well, the leadership was actually quite happy to have this whole new set of insights and this whole new dimension of data to play with. But on the technical side, so their counterparts in engineering weren't honestly not very impressed. They were basically wondering why they were even sitting in that meeting. And I don't blame them, because the recommendations were simply not technical enough, and the ownership on who was supposed to do something about it was not clear. Often enough, we were in a situation where the meeting would end and people wouldn't even really know if we were asking them to do something, or if maybe a central infrastructure team was supposed to do something on their behalf, and all of that. So everyone was smiling, the meeting was over, and at the end of that, we would end up with a lot of dropped balls right at the end of the meeting. And the month after, we would meet again, and nothing would have changed, and eventually things were even worse than before, because a lot of the findings were just left there. Actionability was meant to be the core success criteria of what we were doing, and clearly we need to improve on that. That wasn't really working as we wanted it. So how about we're trying to get some technical folks in the room to help us out? CCOE maybe? So we did. And initially it was just composed by a couple of very senior engineers with duties also outside of the tech governance scope. We could engage with them and ask them for deep dives as needed. At the same time, the way in which we allocated cost was, and the understanding of our finance teams towards cloud cost was getting so much better that we could finally pass the baton of the accountability and allocation duty to the finance team. So that means we are now in a situation where we do have an engineering pool that we can engage when needed. We don't need to do the allocation anymore, so what are we going to do with our time? Because that's mostly what the main two things are. And we decided to actually start pushing on actionability. And that means we started a bunch of discoveries leveraging those COE folks to start creating relevant and more understandable reports that could be shared with customers. At the same time, we started looking at more different type of coverages. Savings plans were already more than under control, so we started looking at what we could do with Arise. So just to recap, we now have a bunch of great, super detailed report with custom actions for each one of the groups that we want to engage with, and the next MBR round is about to start. What could go wrong? Well, so the customers were definitely not as hyped as we thought they would be. They are now saying thanks but no thanks on most of the recommendations that we share with them. And that's absolutely not where we expected this to go. We thought we just addressed all of their main points, but there was more that they did not share with us and we did not prepare for. Things like the targets and KPIs are not aligned. They are asked to report on different priorities, work on features, and are also measured on different outcomes. They need to prioritize game-related features and not go back and re-architect technical choices made years ago. They were also felt put on the spot in the sense that a good number of the people that are in the room during those meetings are the same folks that took the technical decisions that we're asking them to change. And we made recommendations mostly based on traditional WS usage, but we did not have enough insights in the specific services to know ahead of time why what seemed to be a good suggestion cannot really be implemented. We are a different team in a different organization. How can we think to know their tech better than they do? And while this was absolutely not meant to be a competition on whose skill stacks are better, it's easy to see how it could be perceived in that way. We were also making an additional wrong assumption, that is, every engineer that is senior enough is going to be able to understand those recommendations. But engineer does not equal engineer. Software, system, data, those are all very different type of people with different expertise, with different backgrounds and different skills and cloud understanding. And things do not work in the same way for all of them. So anyway, a little digression here. We do clearly have a trust issue. We need to do something about it. So let's give it a change and let's try it again. First of all, the main priority at this point is going to be to rebuild that trust that we lost. By now, the tech governance team has been made part of infrastructure. I'm aware that this is a little bit of a different setup from most companies, but for us it was actually a very good thing because by that we had a wider access to a significant pool of wonderful engineers that were already known by our customers and they already had an existing connection. So we were able to gather a small group of engineers, think about a strike team, and we pretty much matched each one of them to one or more customers depending on scope, size, skills, but also software parameters like previous interaction, history, personalities. And we basically just asked them to be the go-to point for that customer from now on, and at the same time also be the person that would report within the tech governance group on a daily basis. We were also going to allot a significant amount of their time in doing what we call to pull the seat. That means do the work on their behalf. We still needed customer agreement, support and alignment, all of that thing, but offering cycles on their behalf milded the obstacle that we had about having different priorities. At the same time, the personal IC to IC relationship that is being built helps us planting the seed about doing the right thing since the very beginning. By having our engineers being guest members of those customer teams, we were also able to discuss, promote, and socialize changes away from bigger and leadership-heavy meetings. And all of this created a situation where having this insider voice opened a lot of new possibilities. We were suddenly able to make efficient downsizing recommendations because we actually did understand at that point what their services were, and we were able to dispel the fear of, I know it works well now, but I'm not quite sure what's going to happen once I downsize it. That for us effectively meant that the tech governance strategy was now changing from cover as much as you can to red sites first and then cover what is actually needed. But right-sizing EC2, RDS, Aurora, and all of that, although incredibly valuable in terms of economics, it is only one of the opportunities that this collaboration unlocked. Using the same approach, we made significant progress in also modernizing our fleet. We now gained the buy-in to try different and frankly more suitable instance families and more recent generations. Even things like moving to Graviton for managed services was suddenly on the table, while before it was just something that has always been like, no, thank you, we don't want to go there, too much time, too much effort, too much risk, we really don't want to do that. Last but not least, this is also the time in which we launched something that we call sensible limits. And let me quickly give you an introduction to that. Sensible limits is a collection of stacklet policies that we use to keep under control old and used and deprecated resources in AWS for both cost savings, but also general cloud tidiness purposes. What you can see in the black box is the full list of the things that we scan for daily. And most of those policies are defined with a inform first, auto-remediate after a certain amount of time type of structure. As we wanted to index on safety, we allow for 180 days before enforcement actually kicks in. This means we send to the owners of those resources that were identified repeated warnings before anything is deleted. The cadence of those warnings is monthly, weekly, and then just before deletion happens, starts becoming daily. But the one thing that I wanted to highlight here is that the enforcement of those policies in our case was absolutely not smooth sailing. Tech governance at Riot mostly informs. We have very little enforcement power. So to get policies like this in a state where deletion could even happen has been a very long work in progress that required many conversations with key stakeholders and an extensive, let's say, report-only trial time. Regardless of the effort it took, though, it was definitely worth for us. And this is not just about the gain that you get from the single policy, but it's about setting a precedent and trying to build trust in this type of automation. It is all about normalizing the idea that these are not meant to be constraints, but supports that helps engineers in their day-to-day work and avoids them spending all sprints in just going and cleaning up things that was simply forgotten. So it's time for another temperature check. Are we moving the needle? Are we creating more actionability? And we are. The engineers working closely with our customers are targeting mostly low-hanging fruits that at our scale are still very significant. The advantage here is that going after the low-hanging fruits helps us create a loop that gives a quick gratification to our customers and creates a dynamic that reinforces and validates the value of this type of work. By picking on obvious resource wastage, we have less convincing to do, especially because we can do most of the work that is needed to address it on their behalf. Measurable savings are coming in, and the formalization of this effort was also accompanied by the creation of dedicated programs, so we can not just share back how much we saved, but also put a price tag next to any of the action that we introduced. But going back to the trust issue, we knew that we were out of the scalding water when customers started coming to us asking for their own recommendations. We started receiving more and more questions regarding requests to review architectures, which kind of S3 tiering is more suitable for this workload, should I be looking at serverless, pretty much the whole spectrum of are we using the cloud well? And this newly found trust allowed us to have better MBR meetings. We could report to them on the progress of the programs that we were executing on, and at the same time use their influence to get the extra push for the things that were a little bit harder to get alignment on. But as always, the easier, non-contentious, low-hanging fruits are very limited, and the idea of continuing to bring in that level of savings by, keep targeting the very same things over and over wasn't really realistic. It was time for us to be a little bit bolder and try to explore more difficult areas, so we decided to change it again. As I said, change is going to be pretty much the only constant in this presentation, so let's adjust the team structure a little bit more, and let's try to be ready for a little bit more longer-term bets going forward. And the first thing we did to do that was to release back the engineers that we had, so they're now back to infra. And they're now back to doing their day-to-day job managing the central infrastructure, but it wasn't necessarily the same as what it was before, because they now had access to a whole new skill set, tools to keep doing the cloud upkeep work that they started doing on the behalf of customers. They were aware of what to do, what to look for, and how to do it. They actually now understood and could propagate within their own teams what kind of choices, or the lack of thereof, can have an impact on cloud cost. Does that mean that we are now back at lacking technical expertise within tech governance? Not really. We just decided to level up and tackle the, let's call them medium hanging fruits, for the lack of a better term at this point. And with that, I mean all of those things that we know are important for Riot, but I'm not going to get out of any kind of native AWS recommendation. We shifted and we started looking into what we called internally as performance engineering. So can we come up with our own recommendations that do make sense for Riot and the kind of workloads that we care about? How can we do meaningful optimization? And one of the interesting things that we discovered almost immediately is that for a significant number of engineers, talking about optimizing and how this is a fundamental component of engineering excellence was a much better wording choice. The terminology resonated and motivated a lot of the folks that were quite skeptical when we were just talking about cost as the leading narrative. And at this stage, we had pretty much two separate tracks. The first one is, how can we improve our visibility in discovering new opportunities? And then the other one would be, what can we do about things that we do already know? For the first, we decided to start putting some cycles in to get a better understanding about all kind of SaaS products that were prone to have a significant cost impact on Riot. And what we did there was to try targeting those services to gather an understanding of what the cost levers behind each one of them are. And at the same time, to have enough alerts and triggers to let us know ahead of time when something was about to go wrong, so that we had the time that we needed to get in touch with the service owners of that specific SaaS product so that we could remediate before things were going too far. Waiting for the bill at the end of the month wouldn't have been enough because the damage would have been already done. So how can we get in this process a little bit earlier so that if something happens, because things do happen, we can still stop it? And then for the other one was mostly about containers and Kubernetes. We knew that that was the way to go for us. We also had a talk at reInvent last year on the modernization effort that went through for League of Legends and how we are changing to more cloud-native technologies for all of our games. So we knew that there was pretty much no way back, but we still didn't necessarily have enough of a observability platform to be able to do recommendations in the right way for that. So we decided to leverage KubeCost, unsurprisingly, and we started supplementing our data. And as soon as that was part of our data pool, we noticed two obvious things. Most services were not leveraging autoscaling at all, and most services were asking for way more than they needed. So we decided to start with HPA. Let me quickly show you how that could look like. And HPA refers to, for those that are not aware, to horizontal pod autoscaling. That basically means that the number of pods deployed follows demand. Whenever demand changes, pod will be added or removed as needed. And what you see here is a specific League of Legends service running before and after the HPA enablement. The red line is the cost, and the purple one is the pod count. For those not familiar with Riot or online games in general, due to the nature of games, we tend to have a very distinct pick and trough phase for each one of our regions during the day. And trying to minimize that difference within pick and trough is, aside from actionability, the other thing that we'll be forever chased after. Before implementing HPA on the 14th, you can see that we have a fixed number of pods, and the cost varies depending on the pick and trough and cloud economics for that day. After the implementation, the curve becomes much more representative of the demand. And please note that the cost is now significantly lower at peak than what was before at trough. In terms of EC2 daily cost, this is another of the metrics that we tend to track. We saw decreases in the realm of 88% for several of our services. And when we start tackling the resources that were requested by each one of those services, we realized that the order of magnitude was, so a lot of services were asking for an order of magnitude bigger than what they actually needed. Things like they were requesting 6 vCPUs, but then practically speaking, they were losing 0.5. So we basically worked one by one, service by service, to bring them back to a state where we wanted them to be. And all of the data that we needed to do this work was also shared back with customers. So they now have access to the full data set via a dashboard, and their leadership also gets a little bit of a hit list, so to say, of the top 3 or top 5, depending on the size of the team, services that we would like them to look at in the coming month or quarter. But that was not the only thing that we got out of this performance optimization effort. If you remember the system engineers that we released back, they continued applying what they learned in this new space and started using their knowledge and connections to enable capabilities of performing infra-modernization tasks transparently for our customers. We were able to move to C6Is, and we are currently moving to C7s as part of a normal maintenance window. Before, this type of work would have been a meaty item in need of a quarterly planning type of alignment, while we can now just, it's just business as usual. And there is one thing that autoscaling has significantly changed for us, and that's the way in which we're looking at coverage targets. Clearly, the previous cover as much as you can strategy did no longer work. That meant for us coming up with an all new set of metrics and models to understand what ideal coverage even looks like in this new world. And I'm not going to go into details to that, but it's significantly lower than what we used to have. We now handle that via a set of weekly coverage review meetings in which we can decide. Our service plan tends to be, generally speaking, spaced out enough so that we can basically just increase and decrease capacity as needed. And I guess time-wise, the other thing that I wanted to mention actually is the fact that leadership alignment has been another thing that we had to work on after introducing autoscaling as a paradigm in the company. Because obviously trying to explain that lower coverage can be better at times is a conversation that is not necessarily the easiest ones. We had to develop, thanks to our strategic advisory team, plenty of new models and data to show that lower coverage can actually be better. And right now we are in our journey more or less around summer last year. Focus was just announced, and we started socializing it as one of the things that we wanted to look into for the future, but we didn't necessarily act on it just yet. We do have a limited amount of cloud vendors that we care about, and most of the work in tracking that spend was already done. So that wasn't really the appealing thing for us regarding Focus, but we still had all of that SaaS spend that was pretty much of a jungle that we're still trying to wrangle because everyone does things differently, as you all know. So trying to get all of that together would have been very, very interesting for us. So, but where are we at, more or less exactly 1 year later? Well, first of all, a couple of parameters in the equation have changed. One of the most crucial ones for us was the fact that Riot now has a lot more aligned set of objectives across the different business units. And that means customers do have financial targets too, and they're not questioning how to prioritize cost optimization work. But shared objectives do need shared tracking. And we've made some extra effort in embedding our recommendations and requests in the work system on the behalf of our customers. At Riot, work systems greatly differ from team to team, and that means we need to be flexible enough to be able to send the work in the right direction. Currently, we do this manually, as in a human decides on a case-by-case case how to engage and how to connect the different stakeholders and work systems. But this is absolutely something that we want to stop doing and automate as soon as possible. We still do have a couple of blockers that are preventing us to do this right now, but that's definitely the next thing that we're going to be looking into. On the plus side, the relationship and trust that we've built so far are still paying off. We are now in a position in which we can be proactive and not just reactive. We are looped in early in the process, and especially for R&D titles, this is extremely valuable. We can review and contribute recommendations to game teams that are still under active development, and if we do see something that is likely to cause an issue down the line, we can fix it before it becomes a problem. And that's exactly where we want to be, working on avoiding spend instead of just adjusting things after the fact. Also for established games and groups, things have improved significantly. We still have our recurring MBRs, and thanks to that, we are now able to get insights into, or a heads up if you want to call it like that, into about coming events, campaigns, new game modes, anything that would significantly shift or influence the projections and capacity that we were working on, basically. And what I mentioned is also valid for, new services, vendors, features, anything that would significantly impact our work. Now, don't get me wrong, this is far from being perfect, and it's fully on a voluntary basis. There is no actual obligation whatsoever for them to share, but they are. And while in some cases things could slip, this is still significantly better than the level of visibility that we had 12 to 18 months back. Focus is still in the back of our minds. We still haven't actively implemented any guardrail yet, but we are in discussion to see if focus could eventually be added as part of our purchasing checklist. So try to put that as a prerequisite for onboarding additional services. And the dream there would be that any SaaS service with variable spend would be just another building block that we can plug in easily into our governance framework, including the full set of features that we care about. And with that, I mean allocation, usage, but also things like anomaly detection. Most likely, we will need to approach this gradually, but right now, the North Star remains focused and possibly at some point, an open source tool able to ingest them all, if that works, but we will see about that. So that the chase for actionability is still ongoing. One way to look at actionability is, after all, to enable folks with what they need for take action, may this be education, practical skills, or tooling. Working closely with the governance has empowered our infrastructure engineers to understand cloud economics, to fully grasp how their day-to-day work and choices can influence cost and where to look at for reducing it. The performance engineering work brought us closer to the service owners. Leveraging the concept of engineering excellence, we created interest and drive in creating optimized and cost-conscious and more reliable services. One of the things I did not mention yet is that a lot of the long-lived player-impacting issues that we had for years were addressed and resolved as part of that work, because people finally started looking at why that service was built in that way. How can we remove some of the resources that they needed? And that triggered, as a result of that, discovering things that have been just buried in the services for years. And that's pretty much what I truly mean when I'm talking about engineering excellence. It's all connected. It's not just cost. It's not just making sure that the service is reliable. I will also add that this has resonated so well with our service owners that they started their own optimization work. So that means it's not just a governance anymore with their own people doing that work, but they also spawned their own engineers to do something similar for the services that we were not targeting. And we are very confident that any new service from now on will benefit from all of the learnings and the new best practices that this collaboration has created. While the work will never be fully complete, we now do realize what a difference can make to tune the recommendations to the right audience. And with tuning, I mean the language used, the depth of the explanation, and most importantly, the relevance for the folks that need to take action. Just throwing that at people without clear guidance on what to do with it is often counterproductive. Speaking of data, let's quickly touch on tooling. And I guess my take here is to continue with a similar approach. Just don't try to gold plate things. Rarely anything that we build is ready to go from day one. I am fully convinced that no level of planning, scoping, requirement gathering, or anything that you like will ever give you something that is perfect to go from day one. As soon as you put tooling in the hands of the end users, they will either tear it apart if they're interested or just not use it if they're not. And both reactions are super valuable. Our current balance consists of a set of dashboards available for self-service use for our customers, and they cover all of cloud costs, sortable by different dimensions like group, teams, services, tags, etc. All of the AWS default recommendations, again, aggregated so that a single customer can see all of their accounts in one place, and containers related insights. And for those, we're covering cost, waste, but we're also giving them basic tuning recommendations for each one of the services. And last but not least, a security scorecard. Is that perfect? Far from it, but it does the job for now. And each month, we gather input as part of our monthly business reviews with our customers and tweak and adjust visuals, data, reports based on what we hear. Basically, pretty much micro-continuous improvement. And speaking of continuous improvement, let's see what we identified further ahead. So the main problem we're still trying to fully solve is to be able to make a clear cut between who's paying for something versus who's supposed to fix the issue. As I was mentioning at the beginning of the presentation, we do have a central infra team accountable for the operations of several AWS accounts on the behalf of customers, so like a game team. And while cost allocation works well with this model, it does create friction in terms of actionability. The folks paying for something are getting reports and call for action that shouldn't really go to them, and at the same time, we have the infra teams that are not getting a full view of what actions we're asking them to take. Right now, we try to balance the situation with the manual human interaction that we discussed before, but to identify who's the best contact to action our recommendation, it's still our priority, and for that, we will need an additional dimension in our data. We are looking at solving this either by doubling down on tags, that's obviously always an option, or alternatively, we could follow the same type of methodology that we are currently using for cost allocation. The added value of using tags, though, would be that we would be suddenly able to switch to upstream open source tooling that wouldn't necessarily cope well with the way in which we're doing things today. And for us, moving to, a situation where we could just consume products that are already available instead of investing Riot resources to it would be very advantageous, because where we want Rioters to work is on what really makes the difference for Riot, instead of just rebuilding yet another billing tool that we could most likely get somewhere else. So in terms of differentiation and Riotized workloads, we want to continue expand on what makes the difference for us. And the ones that we are trying to target at the moment are pretty much something that I'm relatively sure is going to resonate with most of you, apart from maybe two. But yeah, data workloads are definitely a target. We are heavy Databricks users, and there is a lot of potential there in terms of optimization. Build farms together with game servers are pretty much the bread and butter of a gaming company, so that is a very significant pool of where our cost and spend goes to. We do have also on our target what we called player platform. Imagine all of those type of services that are shared across multiple games, like logging, queues, matchmaking, etc. Do we know if every one of our games is using those internal services in the best possible way? The answer is most likely not, but at the moment we don't have any data to show it. So that's why we would like to turn that into a specific workload that we're targeting. And last but not least, Datadog, because just asking people to be mindful about their spend without telling them what to do doesn't really go very far. We also want to integrate properly in the different work system that we have at Riot. The current human toil is really unnecessary, and frankly, we knew since the very beginning that automation here was the way forward. The main difficulty is that the big variety of tooling used across the company and preferences on how intake work from the different groups is significant. For some, the ideal first contact is in Jira, others wants us to send them a Slack message. Some people want us to talk to a selected group of very senior engineers, other wants us to just go to the team and get it done in that way. And we are willing to tailor our services to their preferences because eliminating that friction is necessary to improve our chances to get the work done. We want tooling to do the heavy lifting for us, though, so that important data like resolution time, projected savings, or priority can be easily visualized and followed up upon. And last but not least, we absolutely want to reach out to the right audience for each recommendations. And we want those recommendations to be complete, clear, and actionable by any engineer at Riot, regardless of the background or the team that they're working on. We're also aware that at our scale, it's easy to start flooding folks with unnecessary notifications. The idea here is to have tech governance to prioritize all of the possible recommendations, aggregate them, and then only then push them, anything that we deem to be important, to the customers directly in the system that they use to plan their work. By doing this, we can control the flow and release as much or as little as needed to create a steady flow of progress without overwhelming our customers. We also want to know when teams do not find the recommendations applicable to them so that we can adapt it. And due to that, we're planning to also capture the why should a recommendation be rejected. With this in place, also our reporting up approach will change a little bit. The time we spend together in our monthly meetings is precious, and if we can cut any of those meetings down to what is really needed and where we do actually necessitate their involvement, that would be a much better way of spending our time together. We also want to empower them, though, with meaningful summaries that are capturing the way in which their own people are reacting to the recommendations that we're sending them. So the idea there is that if they would decline any of our recommendations, they would be fully aware of the why they did, but also the cost that is associated to declining that specific recommendation. And that brings me towards the end of the slide, but the true statement from the beginning is still running. More changes ahead of us, but that's definitely for another time. I just wanted to make sure that I share my thanks to all of the team at Riot that made this possible. Particular shout out goes to our strategic advisory team. Without their help on visualizing all of the data that we consume every single day, without their insights on Kubernetes cost, I would have way less to talk about today. So I guess that's really it. Thanks for enduring those 30 minutes, and thanks for tolerating my shaking voice, I guess.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.